Hi, my name is Barrett Harkins, and today I've entitled my talk, Folders for God. One of the first things you need to know about me is that I'm from Texas, but for the last 8 years I've lived in Sweden, where I serve with Campus Crusade for Christ. And one of the first things you need to know is Sweden is not Switzerland. People get these two confused all the time. I, in fact, have family members who still think that I live in Switzerland. Sometimes they'll say, hey, bring me home some good chocolate. So just to keep a few things straight, this is Sweden. This is Switzerland. This is Sweden. This is Switzerland. Got it? They have pretty different spiritual climates, as a matter of fact. It's not to say that Switzerland, like the rest of Europe, isn't difficult. It is. But Sweden is particularly difficult. It is one of the world's largest atheist agnostic countries, 95%, as most count it. Now, these aren't angry atheists like we encounter in America oftentimes, who are ready to jump down your throat at any given moment. No, these are more the happy agnostics, as I like to call them. And when I came here several years ago, I encountered some students, and I began seeing a recurring theme. And so I have a student here that's going to tell you a little bit about how she views God in her particular brand of atheism.
I was never taught to believe in God, but I think, so for me, it's just something like a power, something, because I believe, I don't know.
There you have it. I was never taught to believe in God. For me, it is just something, and what does she come to? I don't know. And this is where I began to see that I was dealing with a different kind of atheist, a different kind of agnostic. They didn't generally believe the things that I had thought that they had believed before. They didn't reject God, they didn't reject Jesus, but rather there was this sense of unfamiliarity with the idea of who God was. Startling story for you. One day I was out talking to university students, my wife and I, and we walked up to 3 students, and we started using a tool that we call Solarium. And in that tool, we found out with the 3 students who were there, that all 3 of these students, 24 years old, had never actually met a Christian. It's not that they didn't believe in God and they had met lots of Christians and they even heard the gospel. No, they had never actually met a Christian in a country of 9 million people that is considered Christian. This was phenomenal to me, and it was in that moment that one of the girls looked at me, and this was a moment that showed to me what I was dealing with, and that was this. She thought that I believed the world was flat. She didn't pity me for it, but she was sitting there thinking in her head, I always knew that these people existed, but I never thought I would meet one of them. And it was some kind of interesting science project. And so after that, I began to talk to other students, and one student told me, I'd rather talk about everyone I've slept with than talk about God. One student who was very close to believing in Jesus said, I want to believe in God, but it feels so unnatural. And so as I began to kind of think about these things and ponder what is going on here, this is a different kind of lack of spirituality than I've ever encountered, I began to think, we have folders for God. We have folders for any subject. If I say the word escrow and you've bought a house, you know exactly what I mean. You go through all of those things. I bought a house in Sweden, and I've never bought a house in the U.S. So escrow is still a very difficult idea in my head because we have a different system here in Sweden. And so I don't have a broad spectrum of things. Or if you happen to be a 4th-year seminary student or a PhD, if I say tetragrammaton, what do you think? You know exactly the verses and the ideas that go along with that. You know the breadth of theology. But if you say that to someone who's never studied theology, all of a sudden you go, what in the world is that? They don't have folders for what that is. Or to think of it this way, you have icons on your computers, and if you click on one of those icons and all the files are there, that program runs. But what if one of those files is corrupted, or it never actually got transferred into your computer? What happens then? 404 error, file not found. And this is what I realized was going on with Swedes. Tim Keller says in his book Reason for God that this is creating a plausibility structure for belief in God. And I began to realize Swedes don't even have the plausibility structure. So when I come to them with the gospel and I say Jesus, they say, who? I don't even know what you're talking about. This sounds so foreign. And so I needed to back the train up and begin at some of the most basic assumptions about who God is. C.S. Lewis, in his famous Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe series, The Chronicles of Narnia, wrote that book not so that children would read it and go, ah, Jesus, or adults would read it and go, ah, Jesus, but rather that children would read it and when they encountered the gospel later in life, they would go, makes sense. He was creating folders for God. So I think we should get busy building folders for God. And that's kind of what I've come to understand evangelism as in this postmodern, post-Christian world. My responsibility is to begin building folders for God. And I think that this happens through the arts. I think there's no better place than the arts. Andrew Fletcher, a famous politician in Scotland and a revolutionary, said, I do not care who writes a country's laws, let me write its songs. And I don't think that there's any truer words. People like Bono and other artists have influenced people for the gospel by using arts in a way that builds folders for who God is. So how do we go and how do we change people? We get busy building folders for God.